to support those, our mission and like our values, we go about this fairly systematically. And I think this talk will introduce some of the concepts that motivate our work and some of the signs that we're looking for through our clinical work. So here's what I hope to cover today, an overview of psychosis and also risk for psychosis, which is our area of specialty. Signs of risk, and then I'll talk a little bit about screening and some practical tools that I think that we support at TTOC and that you all could probably implement or at least consider integrating into your clinical work currently. And then an overview of some treatment strategies, mostly emphasizing what you can do with the idea that we put forth at TTOC being that the best thing to do is identify whether or not a person, or if a person's at risk for psychosis, engage with them or continue the engagement. And then continue using the strategies and mental health supports and services that are already effective with them, irrespective of their risk for psychosis status. Because the strategies and tools that you use now are going to be effective by and large, in supporting people at risk for psychosis. Okay, so I like to start my presentations around clinical high risk for psychosis by sharing a story of a family that I worked with some years back. I've of course changed the names, but this is the story of we'll call them the Smith family. And Miss Smith called me about her two children, her 28-year-old son Thomas and her 17-year-old daughter Jane. Now Thomas, he was carrying a label or diagnosis of schizophrenia that he had held since about the age of 20. At the time of that phone call, he was probably in his late 20s. But he dropped out of school. He left home abruptly in his early 20s, around 20 or so. He was now, at that time, living without housing in sort of like a distant outskirt town in the county. He's completely removed from social connections, from healthcare, from employment. He was refusing to speak with his mom. He was riddled with paranoia, and he had a lot of legal involvement. Miss Smith, she really couldn't talk about her son Thomas without sort of like breaking down into tears when she would think about him. In her words, and I try to think about this differently, but in her words, she had quote unquote lost her son. I put that in quotes because there's always opportunity for hope, always opportunity to find a path towards a healthier way of living. But it's harder to see that, at this phase of illness. Now, Miss Smith, though, was really reaching out to me because she knew that I had some interest in working with folks in the earlier phases of psychosis. And she was worried about her daughter, Jane. So Jane had up until about like, I don't know, like a couple of months before that phone call, have been doing great. She was a junior in high school. She was like on a trajectory towards college, lots of friends, engaged in school, and no real significant mental health concerns. But about 2 months before that phone call, Ms. Smith had reported that Jane's mental health began to look a little different, a little bit less positive. She was developing some unusual ideas around it's kind of like mysticism and like being haunted, and these were foreign to her and her family. She started developing some paranoia. It was like creating some friction and isolation between her and her friends. It was getting in the way of her school. She was like really, in particular, having trouble with like group work with her family. I mean, with her family, with her school classmates. And so it was like very much creeping into the classroom. Now, I wish I had thought about this right before I started telling you the story of the Smith family, but I wondered, so like, I'm going to ask you all if anyone would be willing to either put in the chat or if you want to unmute, but like any things that you might think of that you might want to integrate or in either in the context of your existing role or just in general, like how would you think about services? what services or supports could you offer Jane or connect her with? Um, so I will continue just to mention that in addition to her school and this development of these unusual ideas, Jane started developing a little bit of suicidal ideation, uh, enough for us to develop a safety plan, although she was amenable to that. Um, and 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 that's it. Okay, so like I think that's a pretty good description of the family. Any thoughts or anything anyone would be willing to share like that that they think might be helpful for Jane? Let me see. Open up the chat here. Sarah, thank you. Support group for mom. Yes. So a super important point to get things started. You know that the identified client isn't the only person that needs the supports. And in fact, Mrs. Smith was like very, very proactive in all of this. And like, you know, sadly, as a result of her experiences with her son, uh, but helpful in terms of her relationship and Jane's long-term outcomes, she was sensitized to some of these the early signs and risk of psychosis, and knew that there was a biological vulnerability. So so that was really helpful. So thank you, Sarah, for getting us kicked off there. Um, Mariah, please forgive me if I'm saying your name wrong, and try to correct me, especially because you're like giving me two things to work with here. I love it. Um, but tutoring services, excellent. And in fact, at TTOC, we think that that's such a vital component to support or supports provided that we have a whole model that we've integrated into our service system, or like the services that we offer called Invest. And basically, it's like supported education that provides organization and structure to help a person thrive in the educational setting. So, tutoring support and educational support would be well, actually was actually quite helpful for Jane. So you're spot on with that. And I'll just tell you this, this is more anecdotal, but like if you ask the average person that's sort of on a trajectory with or has experience of early psychosis, ask them like what they want help with the most. Generally speaking, it's not their clinical symptoms. It's functioning. It's like, you know, if you can support a person in keeping or getting a job or doing well in school, that really means the world to them, and oftentimes more than like the clinical symptoms that we are sort of chasing after sometimes as mental health professionals. And Dwayne offers a really important element to Jane's story. So Dwayne, thank you for highlighting the value of peer support services. Um, in Jane's case, we actually didn't have like a professional peer support network which we could tap into and wrap her around with, but the school and our treatment team were able to coordinate quite tightly with Jane's like natural peer support and her friendship network. She had a lot of friends before her mental health stumble, and they really kind of um, you know, like stood up to support her and really showed up in really important ways. And honestly, I actually think that was probably the most useful element of like the services and supports that we put in place to support Jane. And it's also not inconsistent, or I should say, in the affirmative, it's consistent with the research literature that suggests like social connectedness is one of the biggest predictors of positive outcomes for people at risk for psychosis across all of the centers and sites that are funded to support people at risk for psychosis throughout the nation. So definitely spot on with that one, Dwayne. Peer support, critical. Excellent. So good thoughts on these things. And I'm happy to say that like with the support, mostly I think I attribute most of her gains to her peers. But like with the support of her family, the school, the work that we were able to sort of structure around and maybe orchestrate, I'm happy to say that Jane's trajectory went in the right direction, and she's doing great now. So thank you for that, Sarah, Mariah, and Dwayne, and let's keep going. You know, Sarah, Sarah's Jane's Jane's story kind of underlies the work that we are striving to do at TTOC. you know, Jane was showing some signs of psychosis, and psychosis exists on a continuum. In Jane's case, she was on the subthreshold side or at clinical high risk for psychosis, whereas her brother, Thomas, he had crossed threshold and had already developed full threshold psychosis. As I mentioned before, Thomas had schizophrenia. Now, schizophrenia is the hallmark disorder with psychosis. Psychosis itself is a term for specific symptoms. And at TTOC, we are really interested in the risk signs of psychosis, which actually are very much akin to full psychosis or full threshold psychosis, but less so in terms of severity and disruption that they might have and the implications that they have for a person. Um, you see here a couple of definitions. This is just sort of table setting to make sure we're all on the same page with respect to what psychosis is. But I like this second definition here. I got this from the National Alliance on Mental Illness. It says, psychosis is characterized as disruptions to a person's thoughts and perceptions that make it difficult for them to recognize what's real and what isn't. There's not any blame in this definition. There's not like a judgment or a value that's sort of imbued in here. It's just an explanation that if a person has challenges or disruptions to how they think about the world or how they see the world, then that can make it hard for them to distinguish between real and not real. And if you have a hard time distinguishing between what's real and what isn't, then the natural sequelae of that are some of the hallmark symptoms of psychosis, which include delusions and hallucinations. So delusions are ideas that are held onto tenaciously despite evidence to the contrary. Uh, let's see. So I have some examples here. Um, like people are thinking about me or someone is following me. People are talking about me to plot against me, and aliens are sending me messages through the TV. I purposely picked these four examples to show you that like delusions can exist on a continuum. And that recognition that symptoms in general exist on a continuum, especially psychosis symptoms in our case, is really the foundation for all the work that we do at TTOC in terms of engaging folks early. Because we're looking for symptoms that exist prior to full threshold. And those are really the signs that help us identify and work with folks early on in the course of their mental health concerns. So you can see, like, I think people are talking about me might be an experience that many people, including people with and without psychosis, can feel or experience. The same true for someone's following me, although the importance or significance of that might increase a bit and the likelihood decreases a little bit as well. But people are talking about me to plot against me, or aliens are sending me messages. These are more likely to be on the delusional continuum or delusional beliefs that are more significant, more unusual, and clearly not based in like evidence that a person can find in reality. Um, but like the more severe examples, they share themes of suspiciousness with the less severe examples, suggesting that these all of these things do in fact exist on a continuum. And if they exist on a continuum, that actually conveys a variety of different things. One, it helps us know what to look for and which experiences to engage in and with our clients. But also, it helps highlight this idea that symptoms and experiences exist on a continuum. And if they exist on a continuum, all people can relate to them at some level, irrespective of where you are on that continuum. So a person that doesn't have symptoms of psychosis can, in fact, relate to those symptoms at some level. And if we all have a little bit more empathy and understanding, irrespective of our status with psychosis, then we can create a more inclusive community where people are more likely to feel safe in sharing some of the challenges that they might be having with these kinds of symptoms. If they feel safer in sharing those challenges, they're more likely to reach out to folks like you and subsequently to folks like us at TTOC to get connected with the services that will best support them and that they deserve. Um, I can't remember if I mentioned this before, but positive symptoms are called positive not because they're good, but because they represent behavioral excesses, like ideas that are false and fixed, as you see in delusions, and also hallucinations, which are the perception of stimulus in the absence of stimulation or sensation. The hallucination you hear most about are auditory, like hearing voices. A lot of folks report hearing voices as the most significant challenge that they face in the syndrome that of psychosis that they might be experiencing. Especially, I mean, actually uniquely so when those voices are negative. But it's not just voices. A lot of times we at TTOC see things like people seeing things out of the corner of their eye as a sign for risk for psychosis. Could also be smelling things or feeling things, any of the five senses. Okay, those are the positive symptoms. Now, there's also negative symptoms that we're really on the lookout for. So if you were to work with us and refer a client to us, and Sarah were to do the evaluation, in addition to those positive symptoms, she'd be looking for negative symptoms as well. Negative, and they're called negative because they represent behavioral deficits, things that you wouldn't expect to be find missing in an individual. There's five core negative symptoms classically defined. The first one I'll mention, I'll spend a little bit of time talking about this one, is blunted affect. Now, I think blunted affect is you like somewhat worthy of a couple of extra minutes here because when blunted affect is associated with a psychosis or psychosis risk, sometimes what that looks like is a lack of expression of emotion. You see like when I'm talking, I use my hands a lot, my eyebrows go up and down, all sorts of ways in which I express my emotions. When someone's blunted, they have less of an expression of emotion. But what's really important here clinically is that it's the internal experience of emotion that may, in fact, actually be just as lively and vivid for the individual as someone without blunted affect. And so what that means is you might be working with someone at risk for psychosis or on the psychosis continuum at some level, and their expression of emotion is flattened, but their experience of emotions is not. Clinically, sometimes when we're working with folks with blunted affect, we might feel like, oh, they don't like me, or they're not engaged with me, or they're not sort of in with me on whatever we're working on. So the clinical strategy that I recommend to folks is just to ask, check in with them and see, like, I wonder, are the things that we're working on here relevant, or are you, how are you feeling about like this work or what we're talking about or our connection? Those simple questions might reveal something very different than, a misread of nonverbal communication. Okay, the second of the negative symptoms is alosia. This is poverty of speech, so not talking as much. Asociality is social withdrawal. Anhedonia is the diminished ability to experience pleasure. So I always think about this one like if you're at a party or something and like, everybody seems to be having a great time, but you're kind of like not, and you're wondering like, why am I not having fun? That's like just a flavor, a touch of what anhedonia might feel like. And then the last of the core negative symptoms is avolition. This is a lack of motivation or energy, drive, will. It manifests itself in like maybe having a hard time getting things started or staying persistent or active in something that you do get started. And again, something to keep in mind and like actually have some empathy around. So if a person is at risk or has psychosis and they have abolition, just the fact that they made it to your office or to your appointment or that they're trying um, is something to celebrate because it's possible that their experiences of abolition are working against those behaviors. Okay. Just see like just a show of like Zoom hands or if your camera's on, you can just actually raise your real hand or whatever. I see you, Anna. Oh, Katrina, hi. Anyone worked with folks with psychosis? Just so I can get a sense. Thank you. All right, excellent. Good, good. Francesca. Hey, Francesca. Okay. Julia. Perfect. Okay, good. So a lot of this is table setting and or level setting, and we're just kind of getting on the same page. But one of the things that I think you can attest to if you've worked with folks with psychosis is that everyone's experiences are unique and different. So your clients, if you've worked with more than one, you like they're like, as with most people, but like the snowflake metaphor works here. Everybody is unique. There are some things that are true of all, like that will hold a commonality, but everyone is unique. And also, especially if you've had the chance to work with someone that sort of further along in their trajectory, you can see the value of working with them earlier. And that early intervention can make all the difference in the lives of folks at risk for psychosis. One of my favorite expressions in this field, because it's not unique to this field, but it's very true of this field, is that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And one of the biggest motivators for our work at TTOC is that we know that if we can engage folks earlier, um, we can change trajectories in really positive ways. Okay. All right. So before delving into like the theory and statistics and all that stuff, I just want to lay out a few things that are relevant for why it's so important that we partner with people with psychosis, and particularly partner with people early. Um, so the impact of psychosis. Now, depending on how you define the spectrum or the continuum of psychosis, psychosis affects about like 1 to 3% of the population. If you're just thinking about like pure schizophrenia, you might think like 0.7% is sort of like probably the most accurate. If you expand out to the psychosis spectrum or schizophrenia spectrum disorders, maybe 3%. If you include risk, like we do at TTOC, it could go out to 4, 5, 6%. Um, but regardless of how you slice it, it's been estimated that about 100,000 adolescents or young adults will develop a first episode of psychosis. Sometimes we abbreviate that to FEP, but a first episode of psychosis annually in the US alone. This equates, we estimate, to about 5,000 young people developing a first episode of psychosis in Orange County alone. So, this isn't an abstract concept that only affects, a very small number of people. The impact is actually like relatively widespread, and this is only just considering the identified clients. The impact's sort of hard to overstate. One of the most appalling statistics in our field is reduced life expectancy by 20 years. So people that are carrying a diagnosis of schizophrenia are more likely to die 20 years earlier than people in the general population. This is appalling. And there's things that we can do about this. One is we have to understand what's driving that statistic. And I think one of probably like four key drivers of this is risk of death by suicide. So a lot of folks in the earlier phases of psychosis, especially in risk phase of psychosis, where they still maintain insight and might begin to question their sanity and feel like they're quote unquote going crazy, as with Jane, actually, risk of suicide increases. For folks that we interview, um, about 2 out of every 3 of them, especially those who are at risk for psychosis, will report suicidal ideation. 1 in 5 will have a past history of suicide. And Sarah has done countless safety planning with our clients under the watchful care of Monica, who's here as well, and has done such a great job of supporting the safety and well-being of our clients. Okay, so risk of suicide, quality of life is impacted as well. So folks with psychosis report not enjoying their life at levels in which they would prefer. And as I mentioned a moment ago, it's not just the identified client, but families report challenges in functioning and also increased levels of distress. Independent functioning and educational attainment are also impacted, and this is part of why we target educational support for folks that come through TTOC that are at risk for psychosis, because all folks want an opportunity to live a life of their choosing, and education and occupation are 2 pathways to help facilitate that. And our support is designed to help facilitate that as well. Um, and the economic costs of psychosis are quite pronounced as well. This is an estimate from 2012. The research came out in 2016, but I think this is from 2012. This number has more than doubled over the subsequent 10 years. So the economy of psychosis and schizophrenia is um, quite stark and striking as well. Despite some of the challenges associated with psychosis, many folks who experience psychosis can and do lead full, successful lives, lives in the community, lives of their choosing, lives that they want to lead. And I'm happy to report that one of the biggest predictors of recovery or leading a life of one's choosing is early intervention. So engagement early to early intervention will potentiate outcomes in the right direction. Okay, it's based on what I'm gathering from you all. These myths are probably quite common to you, and you are familiar with them and know that they are in fact myths. But I'm going to spend just a couple of minutes talking about myths about psychosis and schizophrenia, because even if you're familiar with them, it's really helpful to think about what your clients might be thinking about when you're, talking about their mental health concerns or if they are carrying a diagnosis on the psychosis spectrum, because these are the things that society has taught them and that we have to like sort of help them unlearn to support their mental well-being. The first is a very common myth around psychosis and schizophrenia being confused for multiple personality disorder or dissociative identity disorder. These are very distinct mental health concerns. MDD, excuse me, not MDD, DID is associated with different alters that sometimes can be confused with voices, but the voices are distinct and thought of as outside, whereas the alters are part of a person's identity or identity fragmentation. With DID, trauma is almost always a part of the clinical picture. With psychosis, trauma can be, but it's not, like sort of almost pathognomonic or like always there. And with psychosis, you hear voices in the absence of sensation, or yeah, that's right, or unusual thoughts or ideas that you like that aren't as part of DID. So these are different. I think the alters make it confusing, but also like the term schizophrenia. When that term was coined by Bloiler in like the 1910s or whatever, DID actually wasn't an identified mental health concern. He was talking about schizo, meaning split, and phrenia, meaning mind, as a split between a person's ability to determine what's real and what's not real, like a fragmentation between the world around a person and how they perceive it, not multiple personalities inside a person. So that's one. Another myth that all people with psychosis are violent, or most people with psychosis are violent. In fact, like surveys have been conducted where they say like almost like as around 60% of people in the general population believe that a person with schizophrenia is going to be violent. That number is like probably 9 times overestimated. Violence among people with schizophrenia is only modestly elevated relative to the general population, and even that is like misdemeanors, and not like very, very significant and severe infractions. What is associated with violence is substance use, and it is true that many people with psychosis use substances, but it's not the psychosis, but the substances and the context that surrounds the person that's leading to violence. In fact, I think from a clinical perspective, we should bear in mind that people with psychosis are far more likely to be victimized than they are perpetrators of violence. So that comes into play. Sometimes our clients will worry that they based on this diagnosis are going to be like a mass murderer because they're carrying this label, which we want to disavow them of that. Another one is that people with psychosis or schizophrenia are all without stable housing. This is not true. There is increased risk of psychosis among unstably housed people, but it's still less than half. I mean, the range is depending on how you sample and the work that's being done in that area. Between 10 and 30% of people that are living on the streets or without stable housing have psychosis. But again, that's way less than half. Um, and then the other side of this myth is true as well, which is the other side of the coin is that many people with psychosis or schizophrenia, they're living in the community, they're living in stable housing, they're living with family members, with loved ones, with partners, whatever, independently. Um, so that is a myth and something that I think can provide hope for folks that we're working with that might be somewhere on the psychosis continuum. Can't hold a job or do well in school. That's one that I've alluded to a couple of times. And that one is also a myth as well. And early supports that engage a young person in endeavors and activities that they're passionate about, whether it's school or occupational or jobs, and then supporting them through those endeavors and not just like giving them a little bit of training and then hoping that that training goes well seems to be what really makes the difference. So a little bit of extra support can go a long way in helping people thrive in the context of occupational or educational endeavors. So all these are big red X's. And I think, even if you're very familiar with these, like feeling sort of fluid in your way about thinking about them can help you work with and better relate to your clients. Speaking of relating, another way that I think is important to demystify and destigmatize psychosis is to make sure that we understand that psychosis symptoms exist on a continuum. I've alluded to the continuum in my earlier slides, but if we approach psychosis as like a us versus them or people with and people without, then we run the risk of making the people that have psychosis feel marginalized and feel like they're a minority that is not respected, and it's dangerous to have that identity or reveal that identity. Um, so us versus them creates a non-inclusive climate that prevents or reduces the likelihood that somebody comes out and asks for help. So, this slide actually was driven by earlier talks that I used to give where people would say, Jason, I understand what it's like to have anxiety or depression. I get nervous sometimes, or I've been down or blue or depressed before, but psychosis, that sounds like something completely different. Um, and so I keep with these examples. Now, these examples are not as significant or impairing as full threshold or even risk for psychosis threshold, but they highlight the point that psychosis exists on a continuum and that we can all relate to some of these experiences, irrespective of where we as individuals land on the continuum. So some examples, dreams. Maybe show of hands or nods, or whatever. Anybody like ever had a dream where like they woke up from the dream and for a moment they were confused as to whether or not that actually happened. Okay, Anna, thank you. Okay, good. I'm seeing some hands come up there. Thanks, Yasmin. Cal, yes. Good. Katrina. Oh, thumbs up. Actually, that works even better. Oh, Katarina, thank you. Um, but Anna, I can see you. So you can just keep using the hands, your regular hands. Um, okay. Related to dreams, hypnagogic or oh my gosh, this happened to me like 2 nights ago. A hypnagogic is like when you're falling asleep, and hypnopompic is when you're waking up. And these times are associated with like hearing things, floating, feeling a little not disembodied, lucid. And like sometimes I'll hear like my kids calling me like when I'm falling asleep, but they're like not in the house and I'm wearing earplugs, so it's like clearly not a thing. But the other night, I like felt somebody like push my feet, and like it was so pronounced that like I like woke up. And it wasn't in the middle of sleep; it was like when I was falling down. This is very, very common as well. This is so common that if a person reports psychosis symptoms, even in the DSM, it says check to see if it's when they're falling asleep or waking up. Anyone have this? This was not as common for this group. Raquel's shaking her head or nodding. Yeah, okay. Oh, Julia, you have that. Okay. Cell phone ringing. Ever hear your cell phone ringing like it's almost like a hallucination, right? When it's not on, or maybe vibrating, seeing some nods. This one was so common that it used to be in one of the interviews for assessing for risk for psychosis. Katerina, has that happened? We had to take it out because everyone was saying yes to it. Hearing one's name called and no one's around, like that happens sometimes. This one doesn't happen as much to me, but like people report this quite common. Seeing a shadow or tree and thinking it's a person. Anyone have that experience? I'm looking at you, Josh. I got a little Yasmin, okay, Katerina. Yeah. For me, this one, my best example of this is like, oh, Julia, this happens to you too. Like when I'm driving and I see a fire hydrant, I always think it's like a kid playing playing there, and like every time, almost every time. Deja vu, common, yeah, okay. Seeing a group of people, this has a little bit of a different flavor to it, and thinking they're talking about you. All right. Now this one, the flavor for this one's different because like this actually happens quite a bit, but like in reality, it's not an unusual thought. It's a reality. But sometimes people have that experience and it's not happening to them, and that's on the continuum for sure. People can relate to this one because they don't really know like if the people are talking about them unless they like explore it. Not being able to enjoy things sometimes. This is the negative symptom of anhedonia and like going to parties and wondering like, oh, why is everyone having a good time and not me? How about this one? Any takers on this one? Does anyone have had this experience? It just seems like everyone's having fun. I like to normalize this one because I think sometimes like even like people in the mental health space don't realize that that's like a normative experience for many folks. So if that happens to you, it's okay. You're not alone. It's a thing. Um, all right. How about this one? Has anyone ever had the experience of feeling confused? All right. Universally, yes. Okay. Not all the time, and maybe not at the level that a person that has psychosis might experience, but it's something that sort of exists on the continuum. I will emphasize that, these are just like, analogies or examples that are designed to kind of create connection. But the real life experiences of psychosis are far more challenging. They're more interfering, and they're more distressing. Um, but again, recognizing like the continuum is really helpful for us because that helps us at TTOC identify who's at risk and who's not. Speaking of identifying who's at risk and who's not, the highest age range of risk for psychosis is between 12 to 25. At TTOC, we work with folks as young as 12. So 15 to 25 is the greatest risk, but our window expands to 12. And I think that's important. Many of our clients that we've seen recently have been quite young and on the continuum. So feel free to reach out in that time. And all of this time is surrounded around a very important developmental window, whether it's adolescence or emerging adulthood or transition age youth experiences. Very important for understanding not just the development of mental health concerns, but the development of people's identity and who they are as individuals, and also a time when a person becomes more independent and has to, in some cases, make their own educational, medical, and life decisions. You go from 17 to 18, and there's big changes in terms of independence, and we want to be there to support our youth and young people. So at TTOC, we recognize the importance of autonomy, and we recognize the importance of being developmentally sensitive and appropriate so that the young people we serve feel comfortable knowing that we kind of, are at least sensitive. If we don't get exactly what they're experiencing, we get the general gist. If there's one thing that I want to leave you with in terms of concepts, it is this concept here, the duration of untreated psychosis. And this harkens back to my notion that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. This is really what motivates almost all of what we do at TTOC, because this concept has been scientifically proven to well, let me say that in a different way. If we can reduce this concept of duration of untreated psychosis, we can support people in really positive ways. So if you imagine the arrow is like the passage of time, and this point in time is when a person crosses threshold for psychosis, and this is when they get treatment. That time lasts between a year and 2 years on average. And our mission is to help find folks in ways to like earlier so that they don't go a year or two without treatment. We want to reduce the duration of untreated psychosis. If you think back to the family that I talked about at the beginning, Thomas, his duration of untreated psychosis actually was probably a little bit more than 2 years. And by the time we were able to connect with him, he wasn't really interested in services. Whereas his sister, Jane, we were able to connect with her way, way over here in this area, like at the beginning of risk. And so in Jane's case, now I can't say for sure that it was our services that created the better outcome, but I can say that we were able to support her in the moment. And our goal at TTOC, work with folks in the risk phase, delay the onset of psychosis if a person's destined to develop psychosis, lessen or attenuate the experiences of the symptoms of psychosis if they're destined to develop psychosis, and in some cases prevent psychosis from ever emerging in the first place, which is ultimately the outcome that Jane was fortunate enough to experience. Okay, why is this so important? Well, duration of untreated psychosis is associated with pretty much everything negative that you can imagine. Worse long-term outcomes, more intense services, negative symptoms, social impairment, educational, occupational impairment challenges, just general distress, and also likely increased costs and burdens to the system. There's reasons for this. There's reasons why DUP is bad. DUP is associated with longer or with the absence of early intervention. And early intervention is what we are trying to help facilitate at TTOC. If a person goes a long time on the other side of the threshold for psychosis, like Thomas, he was carrying this label of schizophrenia for a couple of years at least, many years actually. Folks are less likely to be motivated for services, less likely to have insurance or at least know how to use it. Think of it as society's safety net sort of dissolving and not being supportive of them in ways where they could really need it. Thomas did have insurance, but he didn't really care about it or know how to use it. It was through Medi-Cal, but it was inaccessible to him pragmatically. Bad first experiences with treatment, legal involvement is, if that is your entree into the mental health care system, I guarantee you're going to be less likely to continue to pursue mental health services. Your motivation is dampened when mental health is sort of coercively forced upon you, as is the case oftentimes when the legal system is your conduit to mental health care. Miscommunication. I mentioned hope is always possible. I think hope is one of our strongest assets and allies in supporting all people that have mental health concerns, or just all people in general. It's much easier to see hope in opportunities as they emerge, like in Jane's case, where early intervention was put in place, less so in Thomas's. Now, there are reasons that support and contribute to long duration of untreated psychosis, and there's solutions to these too, like people being unfamiliar with psychosis. I'm really excited about this one in particular because all of you who have come to this have committed it at the very minimum, our hour together to further increasing your awareness and education. So going to talks like this is part of the solution. Not probing for psychosis is also part of the solution as well. And we recommend screening questionnaires that I'd love to have Yasmin put into the chat, the prime screen or the PQB. And Yasmin, if you wouldn't mind just putting the 2-item questions in there as well. That's sometimes one of the most important things. Now, what I want to emphasize about these two assets or factors that contribute to long duration of untreated psychosis and the solutions is that these solutions are available to you through a partnership with us at TTOC. So, of course, I already mentioned going to talks, but at TTOC, part of our mission is to screen universally as much as we can. So if you're not sure about how to screen, or you want to screen, or you want us to screen, we can partner with you in that. Our consultation is free to you, and our services are free to our clients. You know, our our services are supported by the County of Orange. So everyone pays a little bit through taxes, but no one pays a dime in direct services. Clients choosing not to disclose symptoms due to stigma. That's the emphasis I've been putting on continuum and inclusive communities really helps with this. And then specialized services not integrated into the right settings and professionals feeling unequipped to help. These are the last 2 points that I think that I want to really emphasize for you to take home before I give an example of psychosis risk. I alluded to this at the beginning, but if you determine that you're working with somebody or you're about to potentially engage with somebody for the first time that might be on the psychosis continuum somewhere, maybe in the risk phase, know that many of the existing skills and tools that are effective in working and supporting your clients without psychosis risk are going to be effective in supporting your clients with. At TTOC and Raquel feels very strongly about this mantra that we have. Folks are far more similar than they are different, irrespective of their status related to psychosis. So our youth at TTOC who have psychosis risk, far more similar than they are different from youth that have mental health concerns other than psychosis risk. And in fact, most folks that we serve and support at TTOC, they don't come to us and say like, Dr. Schiffman, my biggest concern is my psychosis risk symptoms. So I really want help with unusual thoughts and psychosis. They say things like, I'm depressed, or I'm anxious, or I'm having a hard time concentrating, or they say things like, I'm fighting with my family, or I'm losing my friends, or I'm struggling in school, or I'm afraid I'm going to like lose my job, or even things like, I don't know where I'm going to sleep tonight, or where I'm going to get my next meal. And we recognize that at TTOC. We try to address those challenges, and we encourage our treatment provider partners throughout the community to recognize that the priorities of the client should be their guiding light as well, even if they're also carrying risk symptoms for psychosis. So use your existing skills. When those skills or the needs of the client, when the skills and the needs of the clients aren't a good fit, and they might need a little bit more in terms of specialization within the psychosis continuum, feel free to call us. You can call us at any time, but feel free to call us and we might be able to consult or provide some referrals that might be in the best interest of the client. So Yasmin, thank you for putting those resources in the chat. The one resource that I want to emphasize is the copy of the 2 questions postcard that is approved. It's all in bold capital letters there. It's approved for you to use in the community. And those questions basically are something along the lines of, do you ever hear the voice of someone talking that others can't hear? And do you ever feel like someone's playing with your mind? If someone says yes to either or both of those questions, your next step isn't to panic or to like call the CAT team. It's just to learn more, have a conversation, find out what's going on, learn more about the context. Why did they say yes to that? The 2 biggest allies that we have, I think, as mental health providers, one I already alluded to, hope. The other is curiosity. So curiosity around why someone might say yes to those questions can unlock a lot of information that can help support that young person in really positive ways and give you the insight that you need to help support a treatment plan that might be in their best interest. Curiosity without judgment, non-judgmental curiosity. That last part, I think I got from what's that guy, that soccer coach on the Apple TV? What's his name? Ted Lasso. Ted Lasso. Yeah. All right. Anna, you're with me on that. Thank you. So curiosity without judgment. Okay. So just to give you a flavor for some of the things that we look for at TTOC, our thoughts so strong sometimes that you can almost hear them. Ever seen things that others don't see or you find distressing, or sometimes get distracted in distant sounds? Some of the questions that we ask that kind of resemble risk for psychosis. And you'll see in this vignette, and this will be the last thing that I share, this is just one of the domains that we assess for. But this is a client named Gina, and Gina reported that beginning 3 months ago, she began to see wispy figures out of the corner of her eye. But when she turned to look, nothing was there. She also reported that occasionally she sees someone sitting in the rocking chair in her room, and at the time it's happening, the person feels or appears very real to her. She additionally reported hearing sounds that no one else can hear, like the door slamming or muffled conversations. She'll often look to see if someone could be making the sounds, but no one is ever around when she does. She reports that these incidents are distressing to her and frighten her. She'll often keep the light on to help with her fear. Now, this is one sort of example of a client's expression of experiences that we would want to learn more about, and that would be useful for y'all to give us a ring and connect with us so that we could perhaps do a deeper, more in-depth evaluation. So we would probe into the experiences, think about if they're distressing or causing behavior change, how intense they are, probe as to whether or not the person still has insight that they might just be in her head or if she has full psychosis level conviction, because we're able to determine through that lens whether or not they've crossed threshold for psychosis or they're still at risk. And the direction of things as well. So these are the kinds of symptoms, although just one subset. We also look for unusual ideas, suspiciousness, grandiosity, and disorganization of expression. But regardless of all of that, what we are focusing in on at TTOC are to find ways that we can create more inclusive climates, just more broadly, create a bigger community with you all, have an open dialogue and line of connection between us, so that we can help facilitate more screening, more conversations, empowering folks to use their existing skills and to know that we at TTOC are here to help support this. So with that, I think I'm going to end my formal presentation, turn it over to Raquel to see if there's time for any questions or any housekeeping that needs to be done. And also just to thank you all for coming and know that our lines are always open for you.